Hello, everybody, and welcome to this panel celebrating the shortlisted authors for the Specsavers Debut Crime Novel Award of 2021. My name is Jake Kerridge, and if we've learned anything over the past year, I think we can say it's how important books are for keeping us sane if we're unexpectedly confined to our homes for any reason, for any length of time. And it's more important than ever that we keep our supply of good authors replenished. And I'm very pleased to say, therefore, that we've got, reading the books written by our panelists, we've got 5 debut novelists who, if this is how well they write with their first books, then the future's looking pretty bright, I'm pleased to say. Every year I chair the debut author panels at the CrimeFest convention in Bristol. And this is the second year running now that we've had to do it virtually for obvious reasons with a virtual panel. And I'm hoping we all get back to Bristol next year, because I have to say there's nothing quite like the sight and the sound and, frankly, the unique smell of a group of crime writers all packed together in a very small hotel bar into the small hours. But the great thing about this, doing a remote panel like this, is that people can join us who wouldn't be able to get to Bristol, people from all over the world, I hope. We'd like to thank Specsavers, who are the long-standing, very generous headline sponsor of CrimeFest, and they're also sponsoring this particular award for debut novel. Special thanks to Dame Mary Perkins, co-founder of Specsavers, who's such a vocal and passionate champion of CrimeFest and of fiction generally and reading. And I just want to say the winners of this and the other CrimeFest awards will be announced in a video presentation on the CrimeFest website at 1 minute past midnight on the 1st of June. So that's when you've got to stay up to find out whether you've won or not, panelists. And the winner, as always, will receive a Bristol Blue Glass Award and £1,000 courtesy of Specsavers. And I think it's time to introduce the nominees. We've got 6 nominees in total. 5 of them are here talking to us. Marion Brunet sadly can't be with us. She's nominated for her very good book, Summer of Reckoning. But we do have the 5 other nominees, and they are Eva Björg Aegisdóttir, Robin Morgan-Bentley, Richard Osman, Mara Timon, and Trevor Wood. And please, I think, give yourselves a round of applause, clap, and introduce yourselves. I'm going to go around the panelists with the first quick question to start with, because these, as I said, this is a prize for debut novelists. They're all debuts, and many writers say that nothing in your career ever matches that moment when you learn that your first novel is actually going to be published, sent out into the wide world. So I wonder if you tell me just what it felt like in that moment when you learned that you were going to be a published author. Maybe Trevor, start with you.
Well, as you can probably see, I'm not the youngest debut author around. I was 61 when The Man on the Street was published, so relief would be one feeling, I think. I thought, after countless rejections, the book was out on submission for nearly a year before it was picked up by a publisher. So I thought at some stages it might never happen. I left it very late to attempt to write my debut crime novel. So relief and, of course, joy, utter joy. And when you get that first box of books to open, it's just an amazing feeling. So yeah, relief, joy, and utter delight.
Mara, what about you? How did you hear?
I was in the office, and my agent had called me earlier in the day, and he was like, well, I ran into Catherine Armstrong from ZAF, and she really liked it, but there's a long process and no guarantees. Called me back a couple of hours later, and he's like, you sitting down? I'm like, yes. He's like, she just arrived in my office with a package for me and a package for you. And the package for me is an offer. And I was just, wow. I went mental. Canceled meetings, bolted up to see my agent. And the offer that she had printed out for him was on aged paper with the cover of a dossier that looked like a dossier for my main character, which, given that I write special operations executive, I mean, she did a great job with that.
Oh, that's some effort for her to go to. That's very nice.
It was amazing. And I agree with Trevor. There's also nothing quite like actually seeing it and holding it for the first time, and you're looking at it and you're like, it's real. It's real.
Richard, what about you?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because I feel and I hope, given the quality of writers here, that we'll be meeting many times in the future. But I suspect there'll never be a more important or meaningful meeting than this. Because what an extraordinary thing that, 2 or 3 years ago we didn't have a book, and now look at us all, we're all authors. And for me, because I'm used to working in television, and I can have an idea for a quiz show on a Monday, and I can sell that on a Tuesday. And with a book, of course, you have to have an idea in 2017, and you sell it at the end of 2019. And that those years and years of working and hard work and sort of giving up and sort of thinking this isn't good enough, and reading other people and thinking, well, why am I not as good as Ian Rankin? And then suddenly someone saying to you, do you know what? It's okay. That's a real book you've written, and people are going to want to read it. And that's like, it was I've never had a moment like it, I have to say, in my entire creative career.
Amazing. Thank you. Robin, what about you?
Yeah, I think similarly, firstly, just, lots of joy and excitement, but also a bit of I guess a bit of fear and a bit of imposter syndrome and a bit of, oh God, people are actually going to read this now. Is it any good? So I definitely felt like a pressure to make it better once I knew that it was going to be published. Maybe I was a bit sort of cavalier about it before. I just thought, okay, I'm just going to send it in and see what happens. But then when I actually knew it was going to be published, I was like, oh, I better sort out those timelines. That's kind of how I reacted.
Oh, great. Fear, that's good. Fear in a good way, I hope. Yeah. Eva, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, my debut novel came out here in Iceland in 2018, and I went on a meeting with my publisher here, and it was all very casual, because he was like, yeah, so the book is going to come out in the summer, and I was like, what? Okay, and then I went home. I was always waiting for a phone call that he was kidding, because it wasn't like in the UK, there's an offer, and it's a very formal process. Here it was very casual. So I was waiting for someone to call and say, oh no, it's not going to happen.
He could have changed his mind, yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. I'm going to introduce you all in a bit more depth now and ask you just to talk a little bit about your books. I think I'm going to start with you, Trevor.
Okay.
Trevor Wood was in the Royal Navy for 16 years before becoming a journalist and playwright. His debut novel is called The Man on the Street, and it's already received one of the most prestigious awards for debut crime novels, which is the Crime Writers Association John Creasy Dagger. So congratulations on that.
Thanks very much.
The Man on the Street, it's already received warm praise from critics and other writers. So listen to this. Fresh, original, authentic and gritty, should be an instant classic. And who said that? Only Lee Bloody Child. So that's not bad. And the great Val McDermott says, Wood's vivid evocation of Newcastle takes us into the depths of the city, and through Jimmy, our unlikely investigator, delivers an unsparing examination of life on the streets. So that sets up a bit about what the book is, but tell us a bit about your unlikely investigator.
Oh, sorry, I'm still smiling at Lee Child's quote.
Yeah.
The Man on the Street is about a homeless veteran suffering from PTSD who sees a murder, but no one believes him. Jimmy Mullen, the main character, has been living on the streets for quite a while. He's had a very disturbed past since he was in the Navy on a ship in the Falklands, which was attacked, and he's never really recovered from that. He doesn't really want to get involved in the thing he's seen. He's trying to hide from life. He's not really that interested in engaging, but he sees an appeal from a young woman whose father is missing, and he recognizes the photo as being the man he saw involved in the incident. And he gradually gets dragged more and more into helping her find her father.
Yeah, and he's a very troubled man, but also it's a very positive presentation of him in many ways. He strikes up a very good relationship with Carrie, the woman you're referring to, whose father is missing. He forms a good relationship, sort of, with one of the policemen, although a lot of the police obviously have no interest in what he's saying and what he. There's also his friends. There's his dog, who's called
Dog. He's so disengaged he couldn't even be bothered to come up with a name for his dog.
Yeah, but it works well as a name, actually, dog for dogs. And he has his friends Dino and Gadge. Gadge is a great character who's a lot of a conspiracy theorist. Was it important to you to portray the camaraderie of the life on the streets, as well as obviously quite a gritty portrayal of its downsides?
Yeah, very much, Jake, very much. I, right from the start, I wanted to make it as real as I could possibly make it. I didn't really want to sugarcoat the experience, but I kind of wanted to show that people on the streets are humans. You know, they've suffered some kind of trauma, but basically they're the same as the rest of us. Really, they've had a rough time. They've been unlucky at times. Sometimes they've made really bad choices. But I wanted to try and capture the humanity, really. And hopefully, you know, readers will leave the book, and the next time they see somebody sitting in the street, they might stop and talk to them, or you know, give them something to eat, or drop some money in their hats, whatever. I just wanted to kind of make people think a little bit more about the fact that they're just like the rest of us, really.
And in crime fiction, we're always looking for a sort of fresh new detective that hasn't been done before. And you know, I think this is the first homeless detective I've come across, and obviously it's a great idea for a detective because people don't take him seriously because they're prejudiced against him.
Yeah, it's interesting. I originally wrote the book as a standalone. I wanted it to be authentic, so I couldn't imagine my homeless guy tripping over bodies as if he was in murders or something for the next 10 years. I was eventually persuaded that it could be a series, so I've kind of agreed with 3-book series, which I could kind of justify to myself. And the other 2 books will tell a bit more about the backstory of his 2 friends.
Right.
So that kind of worked for me doing it that way. But I had to come up with kind of situations where I could feasibly believe that the police wouldn't be investigating much, and Jimmy could get involved in, really.
Yeah. And how much research did you do for the book in terms of meeting people?
I mean, I had a couple of advantages. When I first came up with the idea, I wasn't entirely sure I was the guy to write it, really. But then when I was reading through some of the background, they think that about 10% of the homeless are ex-servicemen. And I was in the Navy for 16 years, so I thought, okay, I can do the ex-serviceman bit. I know exactly what that's like. So to capture the other side, I started volunteering at an organisation called the People's Kitchen in Newcastle, which is an incredible charity. We feed now about 200 people every single day of the week. So I've been volunteering there for about 3 years now, working as a chef on a Tuesday afternoon. Cooking. It was 100 people before lockdown, but we're now looking after 200 people every day. So obviously I've met quite a few of the friends, as we call them, there, and it's been a fantastic experience, but really useful as well in terms of I kind of felt I need to give something back, really, as well.
Great, thank you very much. I hope they appreciate your food. I hope you're a good cook.
I'm getting better.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Trevor.
No problem.
And let's move on to Mara now. Mara Timon. Mara was born in New York, but has lived in the UK for 20 years now. Her first novel is called City of Spies, and it's a great title. We've got some great titles as well as great books on the list this year. And the novelist A.K. Turner says City of Spies is a highly accomplished debut featuring a fabulously feisty heroine, a cast of engaging, authentic characters, a racy plot seasoned with plenty of sex, played out against the fascinating and glamorous backdrop of World War II Lisbon. Casablanca meets Le Carré. And Phil Williams on Times Radio, who's a great champion of fiction, as many of you will know, he says, I absolutely loved this book. This is easily one of the top 3, if not top 2 debuts I've read this year. So again, a great reception for the book. Mara, the city in question, the City of Spies, is Lisbon in 1943. And our heroine is, like many heroes of spy novels, she has more than one name. She's got 3 by my count, Elizabeth Cécile Solange. So perhaps you could tell us what she's doing in Lisbon in 1943.
Right. So the book opens up in Paris, actually, and her cover is blown. And she has to flee not only Paris, but she flees France. And haunted by the Gestapo and very, very bad luck, she makes her way to Lisbon. And there she runs into a family friend, her godfather actually, who recruits her to work for him, trying to break a German espionage ring running out of the port. And they were targeting Allied shipping. And her role was to find out who was doing it, neutralize it before more Allied seamen are killed. I really enjoyed that plot, actually, because there really was a German espionage ring operating out of the port of Lisbon.
And what was your interest in Lisbon? How did that start? Because it's not a theatre of war that certainly I didn't know much about it, the role of Lisbon in the Second World War.
No, but there was so much going on that the more I started researching it, it was almost writing itself. The original idea came from a Portuguese friend of mine who had knew I liked to write. I had written one novel before that has not seen the light of day. It might not. We'll see. And he was like, well, check out Lisbon. There was a lot going on. And I was like, Lisbon, it was a neutral city. How much could really be going on? And that was the most naive thing I could have possibly have thought, because everything was going on there. People were rubbing shoulders with exiled aristocrats and spies and mercenaries and businessmen. And indeed, nobody knew who anybody else really was, because everybody had a lie about it.
Yeah, and it's just an incredible backdrop for a novel. I mean, you could draw on all strata of society for it.
And it was a real tragedy having to go down to Lisbon to do some research.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yes. Oh dear. And I've just read Ben McIntyre's book, Agent Sonia, which is about a real life woman spy. So there are plenty of them in real life, but we don't read much about them.
Yeah, which is really surprising. Special operations executives started recruiting women in 1942, and in France alone sent in 39 women to operate behind enemy lines. And if you read any of their biographies and autobiographies, they read as good, if not better, than a lot of commercial fiction that I've read. It's. I mean, they were seriously badass.
And at the same time, there's some advantages for a woman to being a spy, because they're sort of underrated a bit or less suspicious.
People see what they want to see. And that's something that my character takes advantage of a fair amount. She's quite tall, so she will stand out. She gets herself into trouble an awful lot, but somehow manages to get through it. And the more I throw at her, the more she seems to field. So, I'm hoping that continues.
Yes, you're going to throw more trouble at her.
I don't think she'd have it any other way, to be honest.
So she's going to end up with even more names, because she's got 3 at least like in this book.
I think so. I've just finished the second book, so we'll definitely see more of her.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Mara. Let's move on to Richard Osman now. Richard has a day job in television production, but finds the time to appear in a quiz show called Pointless every day, 5:15, and now the time to write novels too. His debut is called The Thursday Murder Club, and we have to say it's the first ever debut novel to be #1 bestseller at Christmas, which is pretty amazing, even beating Barack Obama's memoirs to the top spot. So,
or as we've been now at Penguin Bamboo.
And so, although Barack Obama hates you now, Richard, you've got a lot of love from elsewhere. Kate Atkinson says of the book, a little beacon of pleasure in the midst of the gloom. Such fun, which I think is a sentiment a lot of its readers have echoed in the past year. It's been a little ray of sunshine. Actually, my favourite among all the plaudits from one of my favourite crime writers, Belinda Bauer, she just says, I laugh my arse off. And I think a lot of people would agree. So, Richard, it's quite unusual in having at least 4 central detectives. You could say there are 6 or even more. But maybe you'll just set up the premise for us on the 4 main characters.
Yeah, it's set in a retirement community. My mum lives in a retirement community, very beautiful place down in Sussex. And I was there one day. You've got the rolling green hills and the lakes and this silence. And like any good crime writer, you're thinking, well, this would be an amazing place for a murder. But you've got that. And then when I was talking, everyone there is over 70. And, you know, everyone's talking about people who are overlooked or underestimated. And I was chatting to all these people, these extraordinary life stories, this extraordinary experience and wisdom and all of this. And I was thinking, well, firstly, I was thinking, if there was a murder here, then you lot would solve it. That's for sure. And then I was thinking about what an incredible gang of detectives they would be, because they are overlooked. They are overestimated. At the time of their life where they've got the most life experience, they've got the most skills. You know, they've been through so much grief. They've seen people have lied to them for 70 years. You know, they can spot a liar and tell all of this kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I teamed up 4 of them. You know, they meet once a week to look over old unsolved murder cases. And then there's a real life murder on their doorstep. And, you know, it wears the clothes, I think, of quite a cozy mystery, and it sounds like one. But hopefully I'm telling a story about the real world through it. And also hopefully I'm telling a story about how, you know, if you're 70, there are still new adventures and new things you can do with your skills, which I hope is why people have responded to it. But that thing of being underestimated is such a gift for a detective.
As you say, it's something in common with the 2 books we've discussed already. And there's also, we won't say too much, there's the good thing about having 4 main detectives is that there's room for some ambiguity. We're not quite sure whether we can trust every aspect of these 4 characters as well.
Well, that's the lovely thing. I mean, you know, I love a gang film. You know, I love that sort of thing, and to have 4 of them, you know, mainly for me, because one of them was formerly a spy, probably spent some time in the 60s. One of them was a psychiatrist, one was a trades union official, and one was a nurse. And they come from very different classes, and everything in British fiction should be about class, really, when it comes. And every single thing that happens to them, they come at it from different angles, all 4 of them. And as a writer, it's a joy, because every new chapter, you just think, oh, you know what? I'll just tell this from the perspective of an ex-trades union official, or I'll tell this one from the perspective of a former spy. And, you know, I didn't think of that, of course, when I started writing. I just had my little gang. But looking back, you think, oh, I wonder if that was why it was so much fun to write, and why people are enjoying reading it. There's so many different voices in it.
And it's it's old age is very different now, because if you think of an elderly detective, everyone thinks of Miss Marple. But these are very different characters, and I think they reflect a bit the way we're thinking a bit differently about old age in the past few years.
Yeah, I really hope so. I mean, listen, where my mum lives, which is this retirement community, everyone who reads the book says, oh my God, I'd love to live there. And you think, I mean, because you go there, and honestly, I went for lunch. We had lunch at about 11:30. I talk about that quite a lot in the book. Whenever they're having lunch, it's always incredibly early. But they were all drinking, right? All of them. They start crack open the wine so early. It's committed, you know. And there's so much politics and there's so much gossip. But you know, it's all independent living. So you shut your front door, you don't have to see anyone. But the moment you open your front door, the whole world is out there for you. And that's how we're supposed to live, right? We're social animals. And you know, again, it's reflected in that book, and people reading it just going, well, that seems like so many older people are locked away and shut away, you know, either emotionally or physically. And to have this world where you can be amongst people, it's like being at university, but with absolutely no work to do. Yeah, you really get that.
Richard, I feel like I could be a character in one of your follow-ups.
You like to, Trevor? Honestly, 65 is the limit. You can go move there.
Give me a couple of years and put me in one three.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was laughing so much, Jake, when Trevor was talking about his book being a standalone, and you think, yeah, sure, Trevor, it's a standalone. It's a standalone until it's a massive hit, and then it's like, is this a standalone? I don't know if this is. And I wonder if there's 3 or 4 more of these, Trevor. Don't miss a trick, publishers, do they?
No,
yeah, absolutely.
They're going to bleed you dry of each situation. But readers fall in love with the characters. That's the thing, they want more. The publishers are quite right.
That's it, Jay. I was thinking, and when everyone talking so far, the beauty of crime fiction is, listen, you've got this format essentially, which is there's going to be some sort of crime, and there's going to be, at the end, we're going to have a solution to the crime. Fine. So readers will read it. You have a contract with them, and they go, okay, listen, I know where you're taking me. But you can tell such extraordinary stories, and Trevor could write a book about homelessness that no one read, or that people sort of gave up after 20 pages. But you write a crime story where the hero happens to be a homeless man. You're reading the book anyway, and at the end of the book, you've learned a huge amount that you probably wouldn't have learned anyway. And that's why I've always loved crime fiction. Is the best crime fiction, just tell you extraordinary stories about the world. Yeah,
it's that combination of the mystery plot and the story, and learning things irresistible.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'm glad it's only an hour until we can start drinking, because we're recording this at 10:30. So that's.
Oh, I'm drinking already.
Let's move on now to Robin Morgan-Bentley. After graduating with a first-class degree in modern and medieval languages, Robin worked for 5 years at Google, and since 2014 he's worked at Audible, which we all love. In lockdown, Audible has been a lifeline for many of us, and he runs their podcast Audible Sessions, and he was inspired to write after interviewing many leading crime writers. His debut novel is called The Wreckage, and that's a title that has both literal and metaphorical meanings, I guess. And it's the first ever crime novel which I've seen has a blurb from Mel B, and she says, she says, I was completely gripped from the very first page. I absolutely loved and loathed the slow, steady unfolding of your worst nightmare relationship. Robin Morgan-Bentley is a master of hold your breath suspense. And
that's a career highlight right at the start.
Yeah.
I've got endorsement from Mel B. What else do I need?
Yeah, I definitely haven't seen one of those before on a crime novel. And Fiona Barton, who's one of the best suspense writers around at the moment, she says, a terrific debut exploring the vulnerabilities and codependency of damaged individuals. I loved the wonderfully subtle but insistent note of menace woven into the narrative, winding me into the colliding worlds of Ben and Alice and pushing me on to finish it. Clever and compelling. So before we find out who Ben and Alice are, I'm going to put you on the spot, Robin, because as you are a professional interviewer of crime writers, I wonder what question you would ask yourself if you were interviewing yourself.
I'm always interested by why, sneaky question, in why crime fiction is so popular. I think particularly this year, there's been a boom in it, or people are saying it's selling particularly well. But we've had a hard year, right? Yet people are still looking to read pretty often miserable, gory, negative stories. So I'm always curious from crime writers as to why they think that is and what they think the appeal is. And there's some obvious answers about escape, but I just wonder if there's something else there, which is about why people like to read all these dark stories.
That's what you'd ask yourself. I don't know if you have an answer. That's dumping you on the spot. Well, it's a big question. Perhaps you can tell us as much as you can about who Ben and Alice are and how they come to be involved in each other's lives in your book.
Sure. So the idea came because I've read a lot of psychological thrillers and listened to a lot of psychological thrillers. And quite often, the person at the centre is a woman who's going through a hard time. So if you think about the really famous ones, Girl on the Train is the obvious example, but there's so many others. It's often about a woman that's having a hard time. Maybe she's got problems with substance abuse or mental health or this kind of thing. Do you know what? It happens to men too. And I'm really happy to share, and I always have been, that I've lived with anxiety and depression since I was a teenager. And I thought, well, why don't I ever see that reflected in crime fiction? So that's where I got the idea of Ben. As a relatively functioning guy who just has a kind of quite low-level, constant anxiety, which I think a lot of us can, maybe a lot of writers can relate to. And then what happens when something unusual occurs that takes that takes them completely off kilter. So in the case of Ben, he's a primary school teacher. He's driving to work one day on the motorway, and another man jumps out in front of his car in an attempt to end his own life. The man is seriously injured and ultimately dies. And Ben takes on a lot of guilt for being responsible for this man's death, even though it wasn't his intention. And the way that guilt manifests itself is in an interest and ultimately an obsession with the widow and the child of the man killed.
So yes, he gets quite heavily, we don't want to say too much, but he gets quite heavily involved in their lives to assuage his guilt, and more than he should do, perhaps.
I think that's true. He's in a dark place, and he thinks his intentions are right. And you know, things just get out of hand.
And I think we can say, you know, he doesn't always make the right decisions, and he's not entirely a benevolent presence in the lives of Alice and her son Max. But I also think it's interesting that Alice, you don't take the easy route of making her a very sympathetic character. I thought maybe you think she's wonderful, but
she's absolutely not wonderful. I got a lot of feedback, and I wonder if others have too, about neither of the protagonists being particularly likable, and a lot of readers don't like that. That's kind of what gets me going. When I read a book and I find the character objectionable, that's what excites me. And Alice is totally objectionable. Like, she's there's definitely redeeming features, and as you find out towards the end of the book, lots of reasons in her past and in her marriage and that kind of thing that have led her to behave the way that she does. But she's a bit of a nasty piece of work, or, you know, she's got a really acidic tongue, and I had fun kind of writing that character and taking inspiration from women in my life and little remarks that they made. Maybe taking it to an extreme, I have to admit.
Yeah, I'm not sure you should say that. But, yeah. But yes, you're right. Totally objectionable. I was being polite, but yes, that's a way to describe her. It's interesting, though. Yes, some people don't like that, but some people really love it when there's that moral ambiguity of not actually being sure who to side with in this sort of face-off.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that. I like that there isn't a clear hero and a clear villain. That it's all, you know, a bit nuanced, because that's how life is, really. I mean, obviously, in some extreme cases, there's clearly a killer and a victim. But in reality, in everyday life, and in any conflict that we have, there's often nuance, isn't there? And there's often, you know, there's never just the bad guy and the good guy. It's more nuanced than that. Yeah,
I like the idea of you every time a woman you know says something acerbic, you're noting it down.
Got a little notebook. Yeah. That was literally it. Yeah.
And one theme of the book, I mean, you've touched on this, how quickly a life can change, and many lives indeed can be altered forever, which is Adam. You know, if Ben had been driving the car 2 minutes later, he wouldn't have hit. And it's, you know, the role chance can play in a life.
Yeah, I often think about that, just how quickly things can change by total fluke and coincidence. And then specifically in this book, it's about driving and how dangerous driving is. Not to put anyone off their you know, everyday commutes or whatever, but we have this kind of unspoken agreement amongst us, don't we? That
absolutely,
that it's totally fine, but ultimately we're all driving along with these like massive machines, and any moment on the whim of someone else, your whole life and the life of those around you can change. So I'm a bit of an anxious driver as well.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It's this kind of magical thinking. We don't think about how dangerous these things are that we're in sole control of. But yeah, maybe we'll all be in driverless cars soon, and your book will be a period piece.
Yeah,
in 10 years. Thanks very much. Well, let's move on now to Eva. Eva Björg Aegisdóttir's novel has been described by the Times as not only an accomplished first novel and a full-fat mystery, but also a chilling demonstration of how monsters are made. And Anne Cleves, one of the great British crime writers, says fans of Nordic noir will love this moving debut from Icelander Eva Björg Aegisdóttir. It's subtle, nuanced, with a sympathetic central character and the possibilities of great stories to come. We hope so. So Eva joins us from Iceland. She was born in a small town near Reykjavik, and we'll hear a bit more about that small town in a moment, I think. She moved to Norway to study globalization, but went on to take a job as a flight attendant to give her time to write this book. And it's called The Creak on the Stair. And really, I think if that title doesn't give you a little thrill when you hear it, then maybe crime fiction isn't the genre for you. That is a great title. It's translated from Icelandic by Victoria Cribb, and it's already won the Blackbird Award for Best Icelandic Crime Novel, which is pretty good going for a debut book. So congratulations. And I'm going to start, Eva. I mentioned the small town you grew up in, and that is the town that is the setting for the book, isn't it?
Yeah, that's Akranes. I think the population now is about 8,000 people. It has almost doubled since I was a child there. It was about 4,000 then. And
yes, I'm glad you pronounced it, because I wasn't quite sure how to say it. But your main character is a police detective called Elma. And how has she ended up back in her hometown?
Yes, so she has been living in Reykjavik for the last few years, but after a personal trauma, she goes back to Akranes to heal from that trauma, and she expects to get into a quiet and cozy job there, but then there's a body, of course, and it's found by the two lighthouses. There's like two lighthouses in Akranes that I used to go there as a kid and there's like an old lighthouse and the new lighthouse, and the old lighthouse is kind of scary vibe there. So I always thought it would be a great spot for a body to be found. So yeah.
It's like Richard said, you crime writers, anywhere you go, you think, oh,
exactly.
this is good for a body. Yeah. So Elma, she doesn't find life there quite as she hoped. I mean, she knows a lot of people there because it was her hometown, but she's let her old friendships lapse, so she's quite lonely. She's just there with her parents and sister.
Yeah, she kind of has this love-hate relationship with Akranes, like I think many people do if they grow up in a small town, because you have you grow up there, and if you are somebody, well, the teenage years, they can be very difficult time for everybody, though, so that if you grow up there and you get kind of some kind of status that you don't like, it's always hard to go back, because you're always that person when you come back.
Yeah,
it's hard to change in a small society. So
and it's also quite I mean, the English phrase is run down. It's quite a bleak place to live. I mean, very striking with the sea nearby, but and it's a sort of small place where everyone knows everyone's business, but they don't necessarily want to share what they know with the police. So she finds it very different from working in Reykjavik.
Yeah, I think I imagine at least that it's very hard to do police work in a small town like that, where you know everyone, and maybe it's your, I don't know, the friend of your uncle or something that you're close with. I think it's difficult to put that aside.
And I just wonder what, this is your own hometown. I wonder what the people who live there think of the book, because it's not the most flattering portrait.
No, they are always trying to find like the characters. They're like pointing it out. Right. Yeah, this one must be this one, and so I have to be very, very careful not to put any too obvious characteristics in my characters.
But the people who live there, they like the book in general, do they?
They love it. It's actually been, I've written 3 books now, and they are all being taught in the school there, and they, so they are very, very proud to have
and brilliant. And so there's, as you say, there's a woman's body between the 2 lighthouses. And this book has it's a dual timeline. We find out about the victim because in between Elma's investigation into her murder, we also go back in time and find out about the victim's life as a child, quite extensive passages. So why did you want to have a dual timeline?
I think it's because I wanted the victim, like Robin was saying, that I like it when it's not a clear villain or a clear hero in the stories. I wanted them all to have like a backstory that people can relate to and understand why the crime was committed. Because I think like when crimes are committed, it's not always like the problem of the individual. It's like a the problem of the society, like because people grow up in situations where society fails them. So I wanted to have like a rich and deep backstory to explain the crimes.
And that's true. It's often that, you know, the victim is dead at the start of the book. You don't really get to know the victim, even though they're the most important person in the story. But in this book, you really get to know and find out what's happened to her, and a horrible life she's had in many ways. Yeah,
I mean, the victim is a young woman, a mother of two, and she doesn't live in Akranes now, and but they find out that she used to live there as a child. And we get her backstory through the book as well. And
just a last question, because I think I'm told the murder rate in Iceland is not very high. You don't have many murders, but you've got this huge explosion of Icelandic crime writers now. That Yrsa Sigurðardóttir, Ragnar Jonasson are two who British readers know, and obviously there are many who haven't been translated. So why is there this sudden explosion of crime in Iceland, even though there isn't actually much crime?
I think it's because it's such a great place for crime. I mean, it's such a close-knit society, and it's always, I think, interesting to read about crimes in close-knit societies, and also like the landscape and the dark, and I think it's just the perfect setting. But I'm thinking about because Akranes is such a small place, and my detectives, they live there, but they actually have like their places on the west of Iceland, so I can have murders all around there. So maybe next murder won't be in Akranes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much, Eva. And now I think I'm going to ask a question for all of you. It's sort of two-part question, really, which is I wonder if you can share some details of your path to publication. Some of you have touched on this already. And also, is there anything you learned that you might want to share with other people who are aspiring crime writers? Any advice you have for them? Any tips on the process? So that's the question, your own path to publication, and any advice. And if anyone wants to come in, anyone want to go first?
No, I'm quite interested. Can I ask Richard a question, really?
Sure.
When I first was attempting to write a crime novel, I wrote what I guess I'd call a comic crime novel, really. And I did get an agent, but I didn't get a publishing deal. And later, when I was kind of speaking to people, I spoke to Mark Billingham about it, who used to be a stand-up and did himself attempt to write comic crime.
Yeah.
And I spoke to his editor, Ed Wood, and they both said, do not write comic crime. Editors don't want it, publishers don't want it, because they can't judge. They have problems judging whether a book is any good or not. And if they have to also judge whether it's funny, that's one decision too many. So I just wondered if you had any resistance to writing something that was comic, or were you encouraged?
No, because the key is I was desperate to write something that wasn't funny. I was to write because I'm the same. You know, it takes you out of the world if there are jokes. There's not a single joke in Thursday Murder Club, not a single one, and I didn't want to put a joke in. The characters kind of make it funny, and as I was going through it, the characters were making me laugh. But the plot isn't a funny plot. The people are real. So absolutely that. I just thought, no, please don't make this funny at all in any way. The fact that people are laughing at it is lovely. Never pitched or sold as a funny book at all. So you know, to me, I just my advice would be, you know, because I was to anyone writing is firstly just keep reading crime writers, because you know, it takes a long time to write a book, as everyone will tell you, and the plotting is like it's impossible and it's labyrinthine. But you realise after a while, when you've read so much, that actually you have solutions. you do kind of know the shape that something should take, and it's going to be unique because it's what you're writing and it's a world that you're creating, the characters you're creating. But I think if you've read everything and you love crime fiction and you're prepared to put the work in, those two things together would be the only two things I think you need. I think you need a brain full of crime fiction, and I think you need a work ethic and a discipline. Even if you can only find an hour a day, which most people can find. If you can only find an hour a day, then do an hour a day. That's my own advice. Really, is read and just sit down and do the work.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And yes, what you say about it's the characterizations in your book that are funny, but as you say, there aren't.
Honestly, I was desperately trying not to put jokes in all the way through.
Yeah, it's difficult to, when I reviewed it, it's difficult to pick a funny line out and say this is funny and quote it. It's sort of infused with comedy. Yeah. Yes.
The thing about the work ethic and reading lots of crime fiction as well, just don't overthink it. I think it's really easy to think that you need to sit down and plan the whole thing. I can tell you, the wreckage, there was nothing planned about it. I just wrote the first chapter, then I wrote the second chapter, then I rewrote the first chapter, then I wrote the fourth chapter, and eventually it kind of came together. I was personally daunted by the idea, you see on Twitter and other places, these kind of massive planning boards with loads of post-it notes and like maybe one day I'll get to that. But when you're starting out, don't overthink it. Just sit down, open a document, write the first page. And I think once you've got the first page, it might start like coming out. But until you've started, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I agree. I think the best advice is to allow yourself to write terribly. Just write bad text at the beginning, and then something good will hopefully come out of it.
And the only thing I would add to that is don't give up. I write like Robin. I started off, I have no idea where it's going to go. I let the characters tell me where it's going to go. But it's hard. It's really hard. It's hard to get the first draft done, full stop. But once you have that, it's editing and it's getting feedback and being willing to take the feedback from other people. So it's a long road for sure, but don't give up.
I think that continues. Sorry, I think that continues when you're on submission as well, Jake, as well. That can be an endless process. I mentioned earlier, I was on submission for about 10 months.
Yeah.
Ultimately, and in the middle of that, I had an editor who was very keen on it, but couldn't convince the rest of his team and asked me to do a huge rewrite. I did a huge rewrite and they still didn't take it and it went back out again. But don't give up. That you've just got to find that one editor who loves your book enough to push it through the system. And you will get there. You will get there. Just keep going. Persevere.
I was going to agree with Mara and Eva's point, which is don't worry about your first draft being terrible, because it is going to be terrible. You don't read Ian Rankin's first draft. You never will.
Yeah.
And Harlan Coben says you can rewrite a rubbish draft. You can't rewrite nothing. And that's the point. So give yourself a terrible draft and then, work on that and hone it into something, that people will want to read.
I think Lee Child pretty much claims you do read his first drafts, but I'm not sure I believe him.
No, he does say that. Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure. So the summary is then don't be afraid to write terribly. It's great phrase. Great way of putting it. I want to ask you a question about your central characters. I think all of you to get to know them a bit better. And my question is, how would they cope in lockdown? Would they flourish or would they go mad? So I'm going to ask Trevor. I'll ask you about Jimmy because I know a lot of people on the streets were in the first lockdown. They were put into accommodation. So how would Jimmy cope in lockdown?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, because I mean, certainly in Newcastle, where Jimmy is based, he would have been placed into accommodation, which as the series develops, he does kind of move off the streets a little bit, but initially he doesn't really want to. He feels kind of safer somehow on the outside. He's not restricted, and he's also worried about he still has nightmares and hallucinations from his PTSD, and he's worried about the effect that might have if he's living in close confinement with other people. So it would be a big concern for him. So yeah, I think he would have been in the first lockdown one of those people resisting being sent into a lodging or a B&B or something. He'd be probably be hiding in Jesmond-Dean in amongst the trees, trying to keep away from the people who were for him, I think. So I don't think he'd cope all that well.
No.
He'd be okay as long as he could stay on the streets earlier.
Yeah. And Mara, what about Elizabeth? A sort of action woman. I don't think she'd like being cooped up.
No, she's described as drinking too much, smoking too much, and keeping very, very bad company. I think she would go absolutely nuts, stuck in four walls, and would probably be the one sneaking out and getting up to all sorts of horrible mischief. She is too active to be stuck behind four walls.
And Richard, what about your guys?
Well, I was thinking about the real retirement village where my mum lives, and it's very instructive because, you know, everyone over 70 is very, very at risk. And in that place, they've been incredibly smart. They've stuck by the rules. And, you know, we live in a world where anyone who doesn't stick by the rules is immediately on the news. And anyone who goes to test and say, oh, I'm not going to wear a mask, immediately they're given, you know, publicity, and immediately they're on Twitter, and immediately, you know, hear about them. And what you don't hear about is the millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of people who are just smart, kind, thoughtful human beings who understand the science, who understand we live in a community and stay. Even if, you know what, you're over 70, and my mum says, look, a year out of my life is quite significant.
Yes.
I'm 79, you know, it is. But you know what, that's what you have to do. And every time I talk to my mum, I think about that all the time. I think about these idiots on the news and the publicity we give them. I think about how can we actually give publicity to the people who've actually sort of been the heroes during this year.
Great. Eva, how will Elma cope?
I think she would be okay. She's kind of a quiet introvert person in her early 30s. I think she would be okay compared to many people.
Yeah, I think, yes, I would have chosen her as the one who would cope best.
I think so.
And Robin, what about Ben? How would he be in lockdown?
Well, two things. Firstly, I think it would be a great thing for him to kind of keep himself to himself a bit. I think if he was at home on his own, that would probably be a good thing for the other characters. But then I think also he'd get very anxious about it, which is understandable, and he'd take it all very seriously. So I can kind of imagine him going and buying like a World War II gas mask and walking around the streets with like a very high, a very sort of intense mask rather than mask.
Thanks very much. Thanks, guys. I know you, four of you have said you're carrying on with sequels to the series. I just ask you, Robin, what's next for you? Because with the psychological thriller, you can't really keep the characters coming back.
Yeah, so I've just handed in about the 63rd draft of my second thriller, which is called The Sacrifice, which is another standalone about something horrible that happens to a young married couple in a very remote B&B in Cumbria.
Oh, great.
Yes, please.
So thank you. Well, we'll look forward to that and to seeing your other characters, the rest of you, return in your next books. I hope they do as well as the first, because these are 5 really great debuts. It's been wonderful to read them and to talk to you guys today. And I'm just going to say thank you. You can give each other a round of applause as I remind readers that we've got Eva Björg Aegisdóttir, whose novel is The Creak on the Stairs. Eva. Robin Morgan-Bentley, The Wreckage. Richard Osman, Thursday Murder Club. Mara Timon, City of Spies. And Trevor Wood, The Man on the Street.
Thank you.
Thanks. I hope we can do this in person one year, but good luck for June the 1st when we find out who is the winner. But you'd all be worthy winners. 5 really good books. Thanks a lot for talking to me. And thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, Jake.
See you.
Bye-bye.